Hi, it's Terry Gross, host of Fresh Air. Hey, take a break from the 24-hour news cycle with us and listen to long-form interviews with your favorite authors, actors, filmmakers, comedians, and musicians, the people making the art that nourishes us and speaks to our times. So listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.
Late last year, President Donald Trump held a press conference to talk about fentanyl flowing into the U.S. from other countries.
They're trying to drug out our country.
The president's rhetoric shifted from anger directed at other nations to touting domestic federal drug seizures to Colorado.
The state of Colorado, the poorly run state of Colorado, with a governor who's incompetent.
And once he got on the subject of Colorado, Trump lingered.
The governor of Colorado is a weak and pathetic man who was run by Tren de Aragua, the criminals from Venezuela, took over sections of Colorado, and he was afraid to do anything. But he puts Tina in jail for 9 years because she caught people cheating.
Tina, that's Tina Peters, the former Mesa County clerk currently serving time for her role in a plot meant to prove Trump's false claims of election rigging.
And when she walked over and got involved in it, they said she was cheating. She wasn't cheating. She caught people cheating on the election, 2020.
So, to be clear, the governor of Colorado was not run by TDA, nor did TDA run sections of Colorado. And audits show there was no evidence of mass election fraud in the 2020 election in Colorado or elsewhere. Now, all that aside, this wasn't the first time President Trump digressed during a news conference to criticize Colorado. He's called out the state on everything from mail-in voting to AI to immigration. Trump even complained about his presidential portrait that once hung in the state capitol building.
Again and again, President Trump has made it clear that he has beef with Colorado. And it's not just talk. Under Trump, the state is losing a military command and hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding.
Democrats say the president is trying to bully and punish Colorado. Others, particularly on the right, say the state brought this situation on itself.
Regardless of the political lens you look through, President Trump has made it clear he doesn't like a lot of things about this blue state, and he seems bent on using the might of the federal government to force Colorado to change its ways.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance, a show about Colorado politics and policy. I'm Benta Birkeland, and Caitlin Kim, CPR's Washington correspondent, is joining us today from the U.S. Capitol.
Hi, Benta, and a heads up to all our listeners. I'm joining you from this new House Press Gallery booth, and it's a little loud because there's a big, important vote happening on government funding, so there might be some noise. You've been warned.
Just a partial government shutdown, no big deal, right?
Well, hopefully it'll end soon.
And we also are joined by Taylor Dolvin. She's with the Colorado Sun, and this is your Purplish debut, so we're really happy to have you with us.
Hello, happy to be here.
Yay, welcome.
We've been covering Trump during his first year back in office, and it's really felt like Colorado has been in his crosshairs over and over.
Space Command Headquarters is leaving Colorado.
President Trump announcing today that it is moving to Huntsville, Alabama. That has taken years.
Meanwhile, our neighbors in western Colorado continue trying to rebuild after two natural disasters. Now we know President Donald Trump is denying the state's request for federal disaster relief. Back in August,
the Trump administration says it plans to dismantle the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado, which is the nation's premier atmospheric science center.
President Trump has issued the first vetoes of his second term, including one that impacts our state. He says he cannot support the Arkansas Valley Conduit Act. That bill, sponsored by Representative Lauren Boebert, would give local communities...
Trump has certainly cut funding and taken action against other blue states, too. But the frequency and the specificity with which he's gone after Colorado has started to feel like a pattern.
And the president hasn't shown any signs of letting up. Colorado leaders are grappling with the fallout, how to respond, and what might come next.
Is this straight-up political retribution, policy disputes? And what does it mean for the lives of people in this state? Let's get into it. In Trump's second term in office, it initially felt like Colorado was just another blue state the president was unhappy with.
And then, just a few months in, Trump ranted on social media against his presidential portrait that had been hanging in the Colorado Capitol building. The painting had been there for a few years, but seemingly out of the blue, Trump said it was purposefully distorted and truly the worst.
You know, and when that happened, I think people were pretty surprised because it was completely out of the blue. Democrats, though, just collectively shrugged. Lawmakers took down the portrait, they replaced it, life carried on.
Then things got more serious.
I am thrilled to report that the U.S. Space Command headquarters will move to the beautiful locale of a place called Huntsville, Alabama, forever to be known from this point forward as Rocket City.
That wasn't a big surprise because he'd made moves to try to do this at the end of his first term. But the reason Trump gave when he announced it at a news conference seemed to have more to do with politics in Colorado than national security.
They went to all mail-in voting, so they have automatically crooked elections, and we can't have that. When a state is for mail-in voting, that means they want dishonest elections because that's what that means. So that played a big factor also.
Just the next month, in October, during the federal government shutdown, Colorado was one of the blue states that lost hundreds of millions of dollars in Department of Energy grants earmarked for clean energy projects. The U.S. Energy Secretary said the grants did not, quote, adequately advance the nation's energy needs. That decision came as Trump was trying to put pressure on Democrats over the shutdown.
Then came December. This time, it was cuts to transportation. Nearly $110 million intended for Colorado. The Department of Transportation said some of the state's canceled projects were, quote, woke zero-emission plans.
It was another sign that the state was on Trump's radar, and not in a good way. But with other states losing out too, it didn't seem like Colorado was necessarily being singled out.
That all changed when the administration suddenly announced it would close and break up the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, known as NCAR.
That's a federally funded lab, and it's considered the mothership of atmospheric research. The lab does things like weather predictions, modeling and predicting electromagnetic solar storms, topics that have a huge impact for scientists globally.
And the response from Boulder residents and Democratic politicians and across the scientific community was swift and furious.
It's horrible, and it would just be a huge loss to the nation, to the world.
This felt like a tipping point. Colorado as a target beyond just being a blue state.
One thing a lot of people noticed is that the NCAR announcement happened in the same week Trump took other actions to punish the state. It's also the same time frame when the federal government denied disaster declarations from the state.
It was also the first time I had heard a member of Congress say that the president was taking targeted actions against Colorado, doing this deliberately, and doing it because of Tina Peters. I talked to Democratic Congressman Joe Neguse, whose district includes Boulder.
I don't think there's any doubt that he has directed his cabinet to bring the full force of the federal government onto Colorado because of the conviction of Ms. Peters and essentially his unlawful effort to try to somehow secure her release.
In a way, what Neguse is saying almost seems like a conspiracy theory. Would the president of the United States really make huge policy moves because he's angry one of his supporters is still in a state prison?
The timing was certainly interesting because the week before, President Trump had pardoned Peters, something basically everyone in the legal world says he can't actually do. Peters was convicted of multiple state crimes. She's serving her sentence in state prison. Presidential pardons only apply to federal crimes. And Governor Jared Polis has so far refused to release Peters at Trump's request.
Then at the end of the year, the president did something that made it feel like this idea of political retaliation wasn't just a Democratic talking point or conspiracy theory. He vetoed a bill to help small towns in southeast Colorado finally get clean drinking water.
Yeah, and this drinking water bill actually passed Congress without any objections, right, Caitlin?
That's right, Benta. It's a reflection of how non-controversial the bill is. The Arkansas Valley Conduit goes back to the Kennedy administration to address water quality issues in the lower Arkansas River Valley. That's where communities face high salt content, heavy metals, and other things like radon and uranium in their drinking water. The pipeline remains uncompleted, and many residents in the region can't get safe drinking water from their taps. So some have told news outlets that they won't even use the tap water to brush their teeth.
That seems really challenging and also like an issue no one's going to oppose.
Yeah, on the surface, this bill looked like a Republican slam dunk. This is a deep red part of Colorado. It overwhelmingly voted for Trump. And Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, who sponsored the bill, is a huge Trump supporter.
From what I've been reading, residents in the area appeared shocked by Trump's veto, just disbelief that something like safe drinking water could be thwarted by politics. A Republican mayor in the small farming town of Manzanola told the New York Times, quote, "I can't believe he would do that to us."
You know, another recent move by the Trump administration that also seemed to shock Democrats and even some Republicans was news last month that the federal government was freezing hundreds of millions of dollars to help low-income families.
Yeah, all of a sudden, Colorado was going to lose funding for a program called TANF. That stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And that program gives cash for food and other essentials. The state was also losing the money that helps poor families pay for childcare. The administration accused Colorado, without any evidence, of using these funds to support undocumented immigrant families.
Colorado wasn't the only blue state to lose that funding. 4 other states, California, New York, Illinois, and Minnesota, also had their money frozen. A total of about $10 billion, and about $315 million was really what was Colorado's share.
When the White House announced this funding freeze, it caused immediate fear and chaos for these families. More than half of Colorado's TANF money goes to families who make about $10,000 or less a year for a family of 4. So really, it helps the absolute poorest of the poor. But it was really in childcare that seemed most at risk. The state said subsidies would run out by the end of January if there wasn't some kind of intervention. For some of these daycare centers, a lot of their revenue comes from this funding, so they could have had to close.
I'll note that as we record this episode, a judge has temporarily blocked this specific funding freeze. But for Colorado Democrats, this was absolutely a payback move by Trump. Senator Michael Bennet said Trump had, quote, declared war on Colorado.
And you know, that's a view widely held on the left and maybe in the center, but on the right, not so much. And that's what we'll get into next.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.
You love podcasts to keep up with the news. Now there's an easy way to find out what's happening in Colorado every day. The Colorado Today podcast is new from the same trusted source that brings you Purplish. You'll get the top stories, on-the-ground reporting, and moments of curiosity. Follow Colorado Today for the statewide news you need each weekday on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance. We walked through the highlights of what Democrats are calling a revenge tour by President Trump, all aimed at Colorado. Now let's get into some of the potential whys. Why is this all happening to the state?
When I talk to Democrats, one simple reason is that this is a blue state that voted against Trump 3 times.
Yeah, and let's not forget that in 2024, Colorado's highest court ruled that Trump was ineligible for the presidency, that he couldn't be on the ballot in Colorado for his actions related to the January 6th riot. That case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled, yes, Colorado did have to put him on the ballot, but I don't think he's forgotten about that attempt here to try to, thwart his chances at being president again.
No, not at all. And I'm also hearing from some Democrats that all roads lead back to, maybe you've guessed it, Tina Peters.
Yeah, Peters, the former Mesa clerk, she's really become a factor in all of this. A jury in Mesa County found her guilty, tied to her efforts to tamper with the county's voting machines. And a judge sentenced her to serve 9 years. She's in a state prison right now in Pueblo.
Yeah, and you know what really stands out about the Peters situation is that she's one of the last people, maybe the only person, who committed a crime based on Trump's 2020 stolen election claims that is still serving time for it. You think about all the people involved in January 6th. Trump pardoned or commuted their sentences. But Peters is serving a state sentence, and he can't directly change that.
The Trump administration has been really pushing to get her out of prison. Trump has repeatedly called Peters a political prisoner and even a hostage.
And DOJ said last March it would review her case. DOJ has filed briefs supporting her appeal. And the federal government asked Colorado to transfer her to a federal prison. What that could have meant is once she was in federal custody, she could have been put on home detention. The State Department of Corrections denied that request. Then, as we've talked about, Trump has symbolically pardoned her. And Democrats have balked at Trump getting involved with this Peters situation. But I've talked to Republicans who are glad about it. State Representative Scott Bottoms is an evangelical pastor. He's running for governor. He is one of the most conservative members in the state house. He thinks there's a lot of problems with Colorado's elections. He said he's been writing letters to the administration. He was doing that early on to try to encourage them to get involved with Tina's case. And he's been trying to secure her release.
This is something that somebody outside the state of Colorado, somebody that's not controlled by Governor Polis and Attorney General Weiser, has to step in. Somebody's got to stand up for the people. Somebody's got to stand up for justice and what is right and true. And so I strongly appreciate the president jumping in.
This is an issue that's not strictly partisan. There are Republicans who don't support what Peters did, so not monolithic on the right.
I asked Republicans in our congressional delegation, whether they agree with the idea that Trump is punishing the state, and none of them would really go there.
So what do you mean, Caitlin? They just wouldn't answer the question?
Well, like Representative Gabe Evans, he's the congressman who sits in the state's only swing seat. He told me he does see this as a policy conversation. But when it came to sort of my broader question, is this political retaliation? You really said we needed to talk about specific policy points.
We are working with the administration to make sure that we're fixing all of the dumb stuff that Democrats have done to Colorado.
So that is Evans's take on everything. I also spoke with Republican Congressman Jeff Hurd. His take was a little different. He's really trying to figure out what's behind the motivation of why Trump administration is doing what they're doing. But one area where he was kind of very firm is this idea that Congress needs to protect its Article I powers, and that includes the power of the purse, and that the president and the administration can't just take away money without any legal justification.
Interesting. So a little bit of pushback there to the administration.
We've also seen that from Representative Lauren Boebert. After Trump vetoed the pipeline bill, she put out a statement questioning the president's motives. She said she, quote, sincerely hoped the veto had nothing to do with political retaliation for calling out corruption and demanding accountability.
Yeah, and Boebert actually tried to get the House to override Trump's veto, and I spoke with her about it because it failed, and this was her take on everything that happened.
This is a bill that in policy, no one in that chamber disagreed with. Folks are afraid of getting a mean tweet or attacked.
It's always surprising whenever I hear Lauren Boebert show any kind of daylight with the president. But yet here she is calling his veto purely political, chastising her Republican colleagues for not taking a stand. But in his message about the veto, Trump said he just didn't think the government should be paying for these big infrastructure projects.
Well, and here's the issue, though. Boebert's bill didn't really have this huge price tag. It wasn't, allocating millions of dollars to the project. It was a way for local governments to have a longer time frame to repay their portion of it. Now, Boebert hinted, as Taylor mentioned in her statement, that maybe she was being punished for her role in the release of the Epstein files. And Boebert was one of only 4 Republicans in the House who helped force a vote on releasing the Epstein files by signing what's called a discharge petition. And, the White House pressed all 4 to really get their names removed from the petition. And they even invited Boebert to a meeting in the Situation Room in the White House, reportedly to do that.
So does Boebert see the veto of her pipeline bill more about actions she's taken versus targeting Colorado because it's Democratic or because of Tina Peters?
You know, when I asked her about all the administration's actions together, collectively recently, whether they add up to political punishment or retaliation, she really does also, like Evans, think it's about policy issues and Trump trying to get Colorado to fall in line with his agenda.
I would guess the state's policy on immigration is one of those main issues.
Yeah, that's a very big one. You know, the Trump administration and a lot of Republicans see Colorado and Denver as being hostile to immigration enforcement, what they call sanctuary jurisdictions.
I don't know everything that he's doing there and the exact reasons, but I know that the sanctuary status is a huge problem, not just for President Trump. It's a huge problem for me, for Coloradans.
I will add a lot of Democratic politicians in Colorado take issue with that definition, saying they do, in fact, work with federal law enforcement immigration on criminal matters, just not civil ones. But getting back to the point, a lot of the actions Trump has taken with Colorado are, in fact, in line with his view of government. And frankly, Project 2025, that's that blueprint the Heritage Foundation put out to sort of guide his second administration.
Yeah, one of the things Project 2025 aimed to do was to make states, not the federal government, pay more for disaster response. Remember, that was an issue in Colorado. And just this fall, during an address to the UN, we heard Trump attack climate change policies and renewable energy efforts, saying green energy is a scam and calling carbon footprints a hoax.
In that context, it's not all that surprising that Trump would cut transportation and energy grants meant to reduce fossil fuels, or he'd go after labs like NCAR. These things don't fit into his government worldview.
Yeah, and like most things these days, people view the actions, punishment or policy disagreements, from their own political lens. So that leaves the big question: how does Colorado respond?
We've talked about some of the reactions to Trump's actions and why people think he's doing what he's doing, how they feel about it. But the real fight to push back against the administration is happening at the state level. Colorado's Democratic Attorney General Phil Weiser has filed with other blue states lawsuits to block everything from the cuts to safety net programs to moving Space Command to losing grants.
The only response is to fight back and to defend your principles. Because if you try to give in or make nice with a bully, that only makes you vulnerable to more bullying.
Weiser has had some success in blocking, at least temporarily, some of the administration's actions, including a lawsuit about the safety net funding we talked about earlier. The big issue in that case so far seems to be what evidence the Trump administration has of fraud. At a hearing recently, the federal judge in that case asked the Justice Department lawyer repeatedly why these particular states, including Colorado, were targeted. And the DOJ lawyer kept saying she doesn't have that information.
Related to that, I did find it interesting that Republican Representatives Jeff Crank and Gabe Evans signed on to this letter with all of Colorado's congressional Democrats, asking the federal government to restore the federal food assistance and childcare funding.
Yeah, they did. It seemed like a quiet way to push back, and I was also really surprised by it.
Taylor, it was very quiet. And I think it goes back to things we've talked about before about how much Republicans want to go out on a limb in sort of anger or attract the attention of the administration on things that are important to them. But we've also talked about the limits of what Congress can do. And congressional Democrats are going to like me saying this, but they are very limited in the power and the ability of how much they can push back on the administration, which is why I think these lawsuits are actually having more of an impact. And you're seeing some of these arguments made by Democrats show up in these lawsuits.
Yeah, Attorney General Weiser updated one of the state's lawsuits to actually make the case that the federal government is waging an unconstitutional revenge campaign against a blue state over areas Colorado has autonomy over.
Weiser has listed a lot of things we've talked about already, like Space Command and the rescinded transportation funding grants, NCAR, and the denied disaster relief.
And the administration, in response, said, look, the White House has authority over this funding, and, quote, President Trump is using his lawful and discretionary authority to ensure federal dollars are being spent in a way that align with the agenda Trump endorsed and the American people endorsed when they, quote, resoundingly reelected the president. Beyond these lawsuits, it seems like the state's hands are kind of tied. Think of the water pipeline. Is there anything the state can do there or members of Congress after the veto?
Yeah, so even though the water pipeline bill is dead, the idea really isn't. There's going to be a big push from Colorado's members of Congress to get that pipeline language added to another piece of legislation they think Trump will sign or will have to sign.
Attorney General Weiser and Colorado's congressional delegation obviously play a big role in all of this. But with so much of it coming down to Tina Peters, I do think we have to ask a question we do often ask on Purplish. What will Governor Jared Polis do? Because Polis is the only one who has the power to commute Peters' sentence.
Yeah, and that could get him into very hot water with his own party. I was actually at a state Senate caucus meeting recently where more than one state lawmaker was begging him not to pardon Peters.
I think it's almost an understatement to say Democrats will be livid if Polis reduced her sentence. Everyone I've talked to says it's just so much bigger than Peters. It has impacts on a lot of other things, but it seems like it could be a real possibility that he does reduce the sentence. The governor seems more and more open to it in interviews he's done, including when he spoke with my colleague Ryan Warner on Colorado Matters in January.
When you look at people who have been convicted for nonviolent first-time offenses, absolutely her sentence stands out. I think there's no question about that. And we have hundreds of applications for clemency and for pardons, and I thoughtfully review each and every one of them. In my final year as governor, I do want to lean into the value of mercy and do what we can to give people a second chance.
Election officials are also very worried about a potential commutation. I talked to Matt Crane. He's a Republican. He's the executive director of the Colorado County Clerks Association. He said a decision to reduce her sentence would have much broader implications. It's not just about Peters, but about the message it sends.
That you can try to undermine our election community, that you can commit these types of crimes, and that there's no significant consequence to it. It becomes open season on our elections and our election personnel, where it invites meddling, it invites people doing nefarious things, all in the name of proving fraud or stopping the steal, which never existed.
Okay, let's say Polis does let Peters out of prison early. Would a move like that even really get Trump off Colorado's back?
I think in some people's eyes, it is one of the most concrete steps Colorado could take. I actually, though, haven't talked to anyone who thinks it would make much of a difference, bigger picture, especially given how some of the attacks are so much broader and apply to other blue states as well. Also, how can you undo things and make it so Colorado voted for him in the last election? I mean, that's not possible.
Yeah, that really aligns with what I heard from some of the Democratic members of Congress, that Trump has it out for Colorado because he lost the state and hates Colorado policies. So something like releasing Tina Peters from prison early or handing her over to federal custody won't turn down the heat. Here's Democratic Representative Brittany Pedersen.
Something that is so critical is we know bullies don't stop coming back. You can't bend the knee. We need to unite in Colorado and fight back, and across the country and speak out, because these actions aren't going to stop here.
What I find kind of interesting here is I think Republicans and Democrats may have some agreement on this, that they don't think it would change Trump's attitude about Colorado. Scott Bottoms, for instance, said that even if Polis commutes Peters' sentence, Bottoms doesn't think it takes away from a lot of things that he thinks Colorado does that are illegal, like, quote, being a sanctuary city and state. He would like the Trump administration to even indict Colorado Democratic leaders. So I don't think whether or not Peters gets out of state prison early is going to really change the trajectory of Colorado's path with the Trump administration.
I do want to add that for all the talk about how the state is fighting back, there are areas where communities, towns, counties, where they're not. Let's look at Colorado Springs, for example. The city's leaders don't support the state's lawsuit over moving Space Command headquarters, and I think that's because Colorado Springs is worried about what it would mean for the city. They could risk losing out on other military missions. So it will be interesting to see if appeasing Trump, or at least trying to stay off of his radar, will work there.
I'd be curious too, because the Space Command lawsuit is still moving forward from the state. So I'm not sure how much it'll matter that leaders in Colorado Springs don't sign on to it.
I guess we'll find out, and I'm sure we'll have a Purplish episode on it then.
That's it for this episode. Purplish is a production of member-supported Colorado Public Radio and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.
The CCNA is a collaboration between KUNC News, Colorado Public Radio, Rocky Mountain PBS, and the Colorado Sun, with support from news outlets throughout the state. Funding for the Alliance is provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm Caitlin Kim.
I'm Taylor Dalvin.
And I'm Benta Birkland. Our producer is Stephanie Wolf. Sound design and engineering by Shane Rumsey. Our theme music is by Brad Turner. Megan Verlee is our executive producer. Additional reporting for this episode comes from CPR's Sam Brash and Ishan Thakur, as well as Erica Brenlin and Jennifer Brown of the Colorado Sun.
Purplish will be back in your feeds in 2 weeks. Subscribe now so you don't miss an episode.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.